In my personal experience of dealing with an eating disorder for 2 years in my recent past, where I was 140 pounds, I'm 6'2", I was pretty severely underweight, and I did not have a healthy relationship with food. The hardest part in that journey of overcoming it and where I've gotten today was actually identifying and admitting to myself that I had an eating disorder in the first place. Once I did that, the recovery happened very rapidly. It was admitting to myself that I had gotten to the point where I really needed an intervention and I needed to change the way that I thought and behaved around my food. Looking back on it now, it's very easy to identify some of the behavioral traits and sort of triggers that I had during my eating disorder that were clearly red flags that my friends noticed, that my parents noticed. But when I was amidst the eating disorder, it was hard for me to take those examples and really reflect on them that they were actually negative behavioral patterns. Instead, I justified it as it was strictness about my nutritional ideology and I was being healthy doing some of these things. So in this video, I want to address 5 examples that if you can relate to them, you might want to think about your relationship with food. For me, these 5 examples, if I ever start gravitating towards them right now in my life, I'm able to identify that I'm sort of creeping into a path back into my eating disorder, and I'm able to address it and reflect on it and make changes, because you don't want to continue on this path. You cannot optimize your athletic performance if you have an eating disorder. You're not going to have the healthiest relationships with your friends and family. And most importantly, you're not going to love yourself if you judge yourself based on your physical appearance solely and your relationship with food. So to get into these 5 examples, number 1, are you eating in order to fuel your athletic performance optimally, or are you exercising in order to eat? Let me explain. When I was in my eating disorder, I oftentimes did fasted exercise and wouldn't really allow myself to have a proper meal unless I punished myself before with exercise. That is an example of a disordered eating mentality. You want to eat and fuel yourself and carb up, this shirt, keep it carved, baby, in order to maximize your workout of the day. You can't gain your optimum, athletic potential if you're always hungry. So if you're exercising always before you eat and you sort of don't feel good about having a meal unless you worked out before, that is definitely a red flag that you might need some help. Number 2, portion control. When I had my eating disorder, I remember I had this one little jar that I would eat my morning smoothie bowl with granola and fruit in. And it was an arbitrary size. It was just a little cup like this big. And because I started to eat my breakfast out of that bowl, it got to the point where I actually wouldn't allow myself to eat any more than that arbitrary size bowl. So let's say I made my smoothie bowl, I was pouring it in, I filled it all the way to the top, and I had a little bit extra. Normally what you should do is eat that extra, of course, put it in a cup to the side, whatever. But I would just throw it out. I would toss it because I thought that I should only eat a specific portion, arbitrarily decided. Didn't make any sense. Looking back on it now, I was clearly practicing calorie restriction and restrictive eating. So that is definitely a sign. If you're portion controlling your food, you really don't need to be, especially if you're physically active. If you're eating a high carb, low fat, whole food, plant-based diet, eat until you're satisfied. Don't look at your portion control to dictate how much you should eat. Eat until you feel full. Number 3, strictness around meal timing. I remember when I had my eating disorder, I was so stressed that, if my family or friends were eating at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock that night, I would get so stressed out and think, oh, it's gonna be bad for my digestion if I eat so soon before bed. I'm also not gonna be moving my body very much after 8 or 9 p.m., so those calories may turn to fat. All of this nonsense where I was so strict about my meal timing that it stressed me out. It definitely caused trauma and inflammation and bad stuff that you don't want within your body. And I also had this rule that I couldn't put anything in my mouth after 8 p.m. because I needed to fast between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. or something like that, to the point where let's say I was going out to a party or a concert with my friends, if I didn't have time to eat before and I got back at 10 or 11 or 12 and I was super hungry, and that's when you should eat a meal, in that situation, I would just skip the meal, go to bed starving, and not eat until the morning. That is not healthy at all. You don't need to be so strict about meal timing. Yes, do I like to sort of eat my meals early, dinner around 5, and then go to bed nice and early? That's optimal, that's gold standard, but it doesn't work that way all the time. Life gets in the way. So if you are like so strict about meal timing, and if you don't allow yourself to eat at certain hours, that might be a red flag that you want to look into your relationship with food. Number 4, how is your sex drive? I remember when I was in my eating disorder, and this is sort of crazy to me now because I have a very healthy sex drive, and I also had a very healthy one like in high school. But in that like 2-year period, my first 2 years of college when I was underweight, I remember just not being interested in relationships and in the opposite sex for me. It just didn't even cross my mind. I wasn't getting into very intimate relationships, which is so not healthy. That's one of the beauties of life, is having deep connections with people. And you can look this up, but when you're not eating enough and your body fat percentage is low and you're exercising a lot of girls, women will not have their period during that time. That's clearly not healthy. I don't know too much about that because it's not an issue for me, but you can look into that. So that might be a huge red flag that you need to change your exercise routine and your eating routine. But for guys, yeah, you can just lose your sex drive. It cannot be of interest to you. And especially as a young teenager, as I was during that time, that is not a healthy sign. That's your body sending a red alert that it's not ready to reproduce. You don't have vital nutrients, you don't have enough food, not a healthy state to be in. And we're all about health here. You know, if you're in an eating disorder, you're probably worried about your weight and health. You want to be as healthy as possible, and not having a sex drive is a big sign that your body is not nourished. Last but definitely not least, number 5, and there's so many examples of this, I'm just giving you kind of the biggest 5 that were in my life, is are you eating socially or are you eating all of your meals by yourself? I remember for a long time, about 2 years, if let's say I had to go out to dinner with my friends or family for a birthday or a holiday, I would just eat like a raw green salad with no dressing, maybe some lemon, just so that I could socially eat with everyone, and then I would have my meal before or after. And now look, in some situations I still do this. If I have to go out to an event and I know there's just gonna be disgusting food, no vegan options, sure, I'll do that. I'll just eat veggies in a salad and eat before or after. But I was doing that every single time I ate out. Even if we went to like a good vegan restaurant, I wouldn't do that because I was so nervous about ingesting oil and salt that I refused to eat anything with even a drop of those nutrients on them. That is very irrational, especially if, you know, for me, I was a young, fit, relatively healthy before my eating disorder, 19 and 20-year-old guy. You know, if you are clinically obese and you're really trying to have a lifestyle change, yes, you can justify probably never eating oil or salt for a few months at a time because you're trying to lose weight. But if you're just healthy, if you're athletic, you don't need to be so strict. I don't have oil or salt in my kitchen in my living space because I don't cook with it ever. But when I go out to a restaurant and maybe it's an opportunity to indulge for a night and have fun and eat socially, which is an amazing part of life, I allow myself to have those foods once in a while because I know it won't have a massive long-term impact on my overall longevity and health. It's irrational to think that you need to eat perfect gold standard 100% of the time. So those are examples of when I was in my eating disorder, things that I was so strict about, and those were certain behaviors, those 5 examples that I really practiced. And looking back on it now, it was not a healthy mindset to be in. All of those are triggers and red flags that if you can identify with them, you might want to look into your behavior, and if maybe you have an eating disorder yourself. And let's say that you do identify with some of those examples and traits that I said, don't worry, you're gonna be okay, but watch part 2 of this series where I talk about what to do if you identify that you might have an eating disorder.